So there's this woman named Cherry from California, and Cherry had owned her house for over a decade. But after going through some employment and financial issues, the bank was getting ready to take Cherry's house. So one day, Cherry decided to go to an attorney who helped her create a repayment plan for all the missed home loan payments and all the penalties that she had racked up. And they filed that repayment plan with the court. That's also known as filing for Chapter 13 bankruptcy. The good news is that after Cherry filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, all the foreclosure process, the bank trying to take her house, all that had to stop legally. It had to stop. The bad news is when she filed for bankruptcy, that's also when she met a woman named Nancy. And Nancy was the Chapter 13 bankruptcy trustee. We're just going to call her Trusty Nancy, which is kind of ironic. And just so you know, there are actually two very important meetings in a bankruptcy proceedings. During the first meeting, Cherry and her attorney met with Trustee Nancy and the bank and talked out the details of the repayment plan and any issues that they could have had. But during the end of that meeting, Trustee Nancy says, you know what, everybody, let's just stop, okay? I have so many questions. I'm having a lot of issues with this bankruptcy proceeding. So, we're just gonna put a pause on this, okay? It's the end of October. It's very near the holidays. So how about this? How about we pick up this meeting after the holidays, after January, and we can really get things done, okay? Cherry spoke to her attorney and they were like, you know what? This sounds good. Cherry was happy with this. It would take a lot off her plate to know that she had a house during the holidays. Cherry and her attorney agreed to postpone the meeting and pick it up after the holidays. Over the holidays, Cherry was making payments on her repayment plan because it's a sign of good faith during a bankruptcy. And I think it's also necessary to show that, hey, this payment plan actually does work for me because I'm able to make these payments on time. Cherry was making her payments and mailing those checks to Trustee Nancy because that's how trustees get paid. So bankruptcy proceedings usually last about 3 to 5 years. And every single month when a payment was due, the debtor, which is Cherry in this case, she would make a payment, send it over to the trustee, and the trustee would take about 5 to 10% of that payment and then send the rest of the payment over to the bank or the creditor. And that's how they're supposed to make their income, okay? And Cherry made her payments during the months of October, November, and December. But everything changed the day after Christmas. That morning, Cherry woke up to a loud knock and a letter taped to the front of her door. And through that letter, Cherry found out that not only had her house been sold, she was also being evicted. So remember when I told you there are two very important meetings in a bankruptcy? Well, when the first meeting happened and was quote unquote postponed, it was actually not postponed. Right after that meeting, Trustee Nancy went to the court and scheduled that second meeting, which is actually a hearing in front of a judge. And that's when the judge makes the decision whether or not he's going to let the bankruptcy proceed, or it's going to be dismissed, or any changes have to be made to the repayment plan. So whenever Trustee Nancy made this meeting, she did not notify Cherry or her attorney. And during this hearing, Trustee Nancy told the judge, look, Cherry didn't even decide to come to this meeting today. She's blowing this meeting off. Trustee Nancy also showed the judge her books saying, look, there are no payments from Cherry on my books, which is really interesting, language to use. There are no payments on my books. And so, which means she has not shown a good faith effort of trying to even make payments to pay this debt back to the bankers. And because of all this, Judge, I recommend that you dismiss this bankruptcy as soon as possible. The judge, seeing all this evidence and the bankruptcy trustee's recommendation, he goes ahead and dismisses the bankruptcy. And once that bankruptcy was dismissed, the foreclosure process is allowed to just resume. So Cherry, of course, she did not know what to do with herself. Not knowing what else to do, she decided to sue Trustee Nancy to hold her personally financially responsible for everything that Cherry had just lost. She argued that Trustee Nancy had violated her constitutional right to due process by not giving her notice before a hearing, excluding her from her own bankruptcy proceedings, where her property rights were ultimately taken away and she lost her home. Another issue is this is not even the first time Nancy has done this kind of thing. For one bankruptcy, there was this man, we're going to call him this guy named Kyle, okay? So this guy named Kyle had his bankruptcy moving forward and he was paying monthly payments to Trustee Nancy. But one day, Trustee Nancy decided to move offices and didn't tell anybody. So this guy named Kyle kept sending the checks to Trustee Nancy. After a couple months, Trustee Nancy went to a judge and said, look, Judge, this guy named Kyle hasn't paid me in months, and I recommend that you dismiss this bankruptcy. And in that case, the judge also dismissed their bankruptcy, and this guy named Kyle's house was sold without his permission, without his knowledge. So Cherry brought that lawsuit to federal court, but Trusty Nancy fought the lawsuit, saying that she was entitled to absolute quasi-judicial immunity. And in case you don't know, absolute quasi-judicial immunity protects individuals who perform functions that are like a judge or do jobs that are essential to the judicial process. And if a person is entitled to this immunity, they can't be sued for money, like for monetary damages. Absolute quasi-judicial immunity is given to people like medical boards, parole boards, for making judicial-like decisions. But usually one of the components of getting quasi-judicial immunity is that there's some kind of like appeals process, some kind of checks or balances if someone's, civil rights are violated or if someone disagrees with the decision. Cherry's case made it all the way up to a panel of judges in the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit Court is just below the United States Supreme Court. The Ninth Circuit judges decided that Trusty Nancy was entitled to absolute quasi-judicial immunity. They said that she had discretion over when she scheduled the proceedings and whether or not she wanted to notify the parties about the proceedings happening. So she was entitled to absolute quasi-judicial immunity. And because the Supreme Court didn't take up this case to strike down this ruling, this is now the law of the land in Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Guam, and Northern Mariana Islands. Just so you know, Trusty Nancy is still a Chapter 13 bankruptcy trustee to this day. So tell your friends. Tell your friends. If you're looking for easy to understand legal documents, check out the Pro Se blog Patreon. There you'll find a catalog of legal papers like motions and objections, videos where I break down certain legal documents. Plus, you'll find our new community chat room where we can support each other through state and federal court battles. Court is hard and pretty isolating, but with the right people around, it gets easier. Check out our Patreon today.